today's guest is Nancy Novak. She's the Chief Innovation Officer at Compass Datacenters. Nancy, thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so you've, I guess you've had a very long history in construction. Was that your original plan to get into construction?
Yes, actually, my dad was a general superintendent for one of the largest builders in the world. So I spent many a summer on a project site with him and fell in love with the industry, and that's really how I got into it. So my intention was always to be in this industry.
Yeah, for sure. And then you were with one company for a very long time. 20 years is quite a career at that company.
Yeah.
What are some highlights? What made staying in one spot? What were your thoughts there?
So I love talking about this because I've worked for a company for 20 years, and I did raise to the executive ranks. I was a part owner, and got to run a region. And it was the only woman who was an executive in that company for the last 7 years of my career there. But it was wonderful because I was able to retire quite young and then go explore other avenues of the same passion that I have, only using my skills in a different way. I relocated 17 times with kids in tow, and my highlights are, fun things like building, a launch facility for Lockheed, doing the Pentagon renovation, and building museums and just some of the most iconic projects across the nation. And I just kind of fell in love with, I fell in love with the industry because you never stop learning. So every time you build for someone, you learn about that industry. So if you build a hospital, you learn about healthcare, and if you build a office building or a military installation, you learn about what they're doing. And I like being plugged in like that. So it was a great career. Then I retired for about 3.5 years, and I traveled the world. Literally went to 40 different countries, and started learning more about the things that I'm passionate about. And I was very lucky and serendipitously got back into the business, using my knowledge and drawing from my experience, but not actually having to be on the front line running work anymore. So I have the best job in the world, as Chief Innovation Officer.
Great, lots to talk there. So let's go back to when you talked about different industries learning. So obviously, when you're building for, like you said, a different industry, there are certain things you need to know to be effective at your job. What was that process uh, for you? Like, because obviously some of these areas you may have not had a lot of background beforehand. How did you approach learning and getting up to speed quickly?
So, in the built environment, the way I look at it and the way my company was, I had a very diverse portfolio, as I just mentioned. Is anything is buildable as long as you know the principles of building, and a lot of it's relation based, right? I mean, one of my superpowers I felt was the ability to write contract language that got everybody kind of aligned and collaborative and cooperative, right? So I think that makes a big difference. But honestly, when it came to being able to win work and manage work with the different clients that I was so fascinated with, a lot of that is what I call the challenger approach, and that is kind of understanding their business, and their business challenges in a way that allows you to communicate with them, so that as you're delivering, you can help them be successful, not just on the delivery of the project, but in their business overall. And I have a great example of that if you want me to share it.
Sure, absolutely.
So when I was working on the launch pad down at Cape Canaveral for Lockheed, they were tight on the budget, and it was a very evolving project where they were still trying to develop the launch vehicle, and it was kind of exciting, and it wasn't really set in stone when we started work there. So one of the things they asked us to do midway was to eliminate what they call heavy lift, because on their manifest they didn't have a lot of heavy lift, to do. And so they said, we really would like to save a little bit of money and cut this out. So because I understood their business and I understood what they were getting ready to try to do, I flew to their headquarters, and I said, look, you'll save a few $1 million, but this will literally put you out of the launch business for 2 years if you end up having to do heavy lift later. And because of that, they decided not to take that out, and now they are the most successful launch program that particular pad is using heavy lift, and they're very grateful for the fact that we were able to step in and say the consequences are much larger than you think they're going to be. Not a good decision, right? That's a
Yeah.
challenger approach, and that's a client that ends up feeling like you really understood them. They ended up awarding us the Vandenberg unsolicited, because they said you guys were partners with us. We had great visibility, and it was really fun. It made it a lot of fun.
Yeah. And you mentioned heavy lift for people that don't know what it was that.
Oh, so that's like when you can launch a bus into space, basically. So it's the big satellites or the manned missions that go beyond low orbit. So those are the heavy lifts, the big vehicles.
Got it. Good. Now, so you mentioned something about contract language that facilitates some sort of collaboration. Give me an example of what you mean by that in terms of creating alignment.
Well, I mean, it's not like a one size fits all, right? But it's definitely getting creative and putting yourself in other people's shoes. So if whether it's transparency or open book or design obligations, and trying to share risk, those are all good approaches. But I guess the easiest way to explain it is like when you're looking at the what I call the rights and remedies or the terms and conditions of a contract. It's interesting because everyone everyone gets wrapped around the axle over the legal language, right? And a lot of lawyers who they that's how they make their living. And I've always told my managers, I said, look, you know, don't touch any of that language. Get with your subcontractors or your specialty trades or whoever and discuss with them what scares them about certain language. And then in layman's terms, just write an amendment that says we're not going to treat you that way and amend the contract so that there's this really good tangible explanation and dialogue that says I mean, it's all about how you administer the contract. I don't want to mess with the legalities of it, but if you're afraid of what something says because you think we're going to treat you in a way that we have no intention of, I'm happy to write language that solves that, right? I mean,
Got it.
easy.
Some very very specific language that maybe it doesn't change the spirit of the agreement or what was put there, but essentially just ruling out some of the bad case scenarios that are running
Yeah.
around in people's head.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. It's experience based where they're like, well, this one thing happened to me before. I'm afraid the same thing might happen again. And entering a relationship, most of the time, people want to be fair to each other, but there's always reasons why these clauses are put into contracts, and they can be scary. So I'm like, let's bring it down to that layman's terms level. And then the other thing is, just really kind of again putting yourself in others' shoes, like understanding how they make money, how they solicit work. So if you're an owner who wants to get a cutthroat low bid, and then you're upset because somebody left out some scope that was somewhat ambiguous, that's like you want your cake and eat it too. Like you just have to have the reasonable lens that says, if I were you, that I would. This is how I would feel about that. It's a little bit of empathy, I would say. And that is one thing I have to say. I'm going to give Lockheed another shout out, but they were really great about negotiating the contract with us and saying that they wouldn't sign, they wouldn't want to give us language that they wouldn't sign themselves. I think
Mm,
that's a really good practice, to always use. And the other thing that was really impressive was, and we had the very similar language on the Pentagon, and this is where the rewards go right to the people who have the tools in their hands, right? So we're really going to encourage positive reinforcement and behavior for good work from the people who are actually putting the work in place. So that's impressive. I mean, on the Cape Canaveral job, I had $1 million budget to reward the trades to do what they did on that job. It was
wow,
not small.
great.
Yeah.
Now, fast forwarding, you made, after a very, diverse, interesting, successful career at this company, you made a decision to retire. Walk me through that thought process.
Well, so I mean, I did. I mean, I was, like I said, fortunate as being part owner. I was able to hit a target financially. It was a hard decision because I really enjoyed what I did, but I also knew that I didn't want to keep doing the same thing, right? I wanted to try something different, and I didn't know what it was going to be. One of the other things that is an absolute, was a very, very important part of my decision was the frustration I had about the lack of diversity in the construction industry, and there was no one company that stood out for this, right? It was just confusing to me why we could not improve at the upper ranks. So during my tenure with the first company I was with for 2 decades, we were able to kind of get that pipeline filled. We brought people in at entry level, a lot of women, a lot more women than when I started out in the industry. And we saw that the colleges were filling up with female engineers and more diverse engineering workforce. But then it was like this cliff. They'd hit a certain level and just kind of fall off the cliff. And I kept being challenged with like, why is this? I don't understand. This, and it must just be the industry. The industry is just too inconvenient and too hard. I mean, like I said earlier, I moved, a lot, and moving isn't. I don't condone that. I'm just saying that's what I did. And then the hours are not so good. So if you're the primary caregiver, getting to and from the job site at really early hours, and having to hire a nanny if you're in a remote location and you don't have family with you, and all of these things kind of fall on the burden of the more diverse employees, and in particular women. So I was just, I guess my conclusion was, well, this, it's just, and I joke about it. We're kind of like, we're down there with dangerous fishing and mining, and we're just barely above that because there's just not very many, diverse employees, and especially women in our business. And I just don't know how to change it. And then I went on this really interesting trip around the world. I met a lot of people. I started going to these really prestigious conferences that my old company sponsored me to do. And I started learning about other businesses outside of our industry and the challenges they were having with women in the economy and diverse workforces. And I'm talking like, Wall Street Journal and Fortune Media and those types of things. And all of a sudden I realized, we need to quit trying to change the people that are coming into our business and try to change the business to attract the people. Because, our excuse of, well, our industry is just tough and inconvenient and hard, and that's why we just can't get diversity. It's an old excuse, and it's not doing us any favors. It's not making us efficient. It's not making us inclusive. It's not making us innovative. So the goal then, and my passion now, has shifted to how do we change the industry to attract the best talent?
Mm. Yeah, and I think you alluded some of the things. How do we change the industry to attract more diversity and you know all the things you discussed?
Yeah, well, so there are some great ideas. One of them is like really looking at transferable skills in different industries. I do a lot of research on offsite manufacturing. I toured a lot of plants coast to coast, and there was one in particular that I was really impressed with, where there was a paper mill plant that had shut down, and they brought over a huge contingent of women, and they had transferable skills into how they were going to do manufacturing. And so we really promote like being able to look at attributes and competencies that aren't traditional, as far as like, I had this many years or this type of a degree, because a lot of what we do in our industry, we train on site, right? I mean, I used to tell people I recruit at colleges because I know that you're interested in what I'm doing, what we do for a living, not because you know how to do it, right? So it's and then here at Compass, we definitely put our money where our mouth is. I mean, we have in the US, we've got large campuses from coast to coast, and 100% of our CMs are female. And it's a very intentional thing that we do. And some of them are, young and new in the industry and have not been here before. And we work really hard on trying to develop them in their careers. And so far, it's been a spectacular success. We really are enjoying it. And globally, we don't have all women CMs, but in the US, that just happens to be where we're at. And we're very proud of that. And what's interesting is I know that there's a little shade that gets thrown like, well, isn't that reverse discrimination? But honestly, when you say I have all male CMs, nobody blinks an eye, right? Because it's very typical and standard.
Yeah,
So,
and
yeah.
headcount wise, what is that? You said 100% in the U.S.
Oh, we probably have, oh gosh, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm guessing it's somewhere in 30, 25 to 30 or so
Wow.
in place. Yeah. Yeah. So,
Wow.
and then, and then there's also ways that you can like get creative again. It's all about this language. So let's say, the trades are only 3% female right now. And you tell the contractors that you're hiring, hey, if you can increase that to 5% and show me that you've done that, I've got something, there's something in it for you. Like, there's ways to incentivize a very small investment to go see how that needle can get moved. We also mandate, that we are welcoming to all genders, right? So it's like I want PPE that's that is designed for women and not just for men, whether it's gloves or vest or whatever we use. And I want to make sure our facilities are welcoming to both genders. And so these are mandates that we put on our job so that people get that message up front. And then it's really about the contractors who are embracing it and seeing the benefits of that. And then it's that ripple effect. It's like the pebble in the pond, and then they spread the word, and the specialty contractors spread the word, and then you start seeing more presence of more diversity. We encourage the call outs and the basically the recognition for a diverse group of people. It doesn't have to be just men or women, but any diversity, where they come up with great ideas for continuous improvement. And when those ideas are adopted, we ask them to please make sure that you include the fact that this was through a diverse group of lenses, right? Because that really does help from an innovation standpoint. I always like to tell people when I talk about diversity and inclusion, we're human, so we only know what we've been taught and what we've experienced. We don't know any more than that. And so if you don't have a diverse group of minds and experiences and cultures and backgrounds, then you're going to be stuck with very similar teachings and experiences, and you can't really broaden that innovation. So I think it's common sense, but not everyone thinks about it, right?
Yeah, for sure. Now, what's the story of how you got back in? 3.5 years, you're out, you're traveling, you're learning from different industries, going to events. What made you come back? What's the story there?
Okay, that's a pretty good story. So when I was retired, my old company occasionally would ask me to come back in and help them with some of the large, multi-billion-dollar type procurements. Actually, I was a really great compliment. I had a general superintendent who was being challenged with pursuing a large job and said, "I don't want to do this without Nancy." So I was very humbled by that. But they asked me to come back, and of course, I never said no because they were always so good to me. So I went to compete on a very large project and help them through that process. And in that competition, I met some of the chiefs of enterprise and COOs of our joint venture partners. And so the crazy thing is we didn't get the job that we were pursuing, and it was all fine because I was like still on my retirement track. But then a year or a little more than a year later, I was just randomly skiing in Steamboat, and I ran into the chief of enterprise for this other firm, and we had dinner, and he said, "What are you doing? What, are you going to come back to work?" And I said, "Well, I really want to. I just don't really want to run work." And he's like, "We got a great spot for you as a national VP. We need someone to kind of help us take all these mergers and acquisitions and unify them." And so that's how I got back into business. And what was interesting is being in the national role. That's also how I met my current CEO, Chris Crosby, because he was one of our national accounts. So I did what I had to do for that firm for like 3.5 years or so. And as soon as I said I'm going to hang my hat up again, Mr. Crosby called me and said, "Would you mind coming and helping us, build our company here?"
Yeah.
So and I have to say, I just want to point out, like, data centers they're interesting because they're kind of new in the big construction world, right? The cloud's not that old, but what's great about it is, these are very disruptive companies that are trying to, take the lead on this fourth industrial revolution. So, like, really trying to get innovative and trying to figure out how to wash, rinse, repeat, and build out this digital infrastructure around the globe in the industry that I love is helping us, I believe, drag our industry into the future. Because,
Yeah.
if you can't get disruptive and figure out how to do things more efficiently with more innovation and more inclusion, then you probably aren't going to be relevant in the future.
Yeah. So you talked about some of the inclusion, diversity side of the innovation that you're doing. In your current role, what else does innovation sort of encompass? Like what other things are you thinking about and are interested in around innovation?
Well, I mean, a really, really big push in the whole construction industry is obviously the greenhouse gas emissions and the ESG initiatives. So, environmental, social governance, those are all very, very important to us. And what I like to point out is, data centers consume a lot of energy, and it's not just about consumption, but that's a big part of it. So, becoming more sustainable in that regard is super important to us. But so is like, when you really step back, the construction industry itself is just shy of half the world's you know CO2 footprint. It's huge. Most of that is from running, maintaining, operating, upgrading facilities, but a big chunk of it is from delivering as well, delivering these facilities. So I look at our industry as it's incumbent upon us to go and really try to move the needle in a very meaningful way when it comes to being more sustainable, more responsible with the resources that we use. So that's one of the biggest initiatives we have from an innovative standpoint. And honestly, what I think is cool and fascinating about this is as we try to get better and more efficient on our schedules and everything that we do in our industry and with our production, that all relates back to being more sustainable, right? Doing more with less, having a set cadence, being able to eliminate waste. All of those things really tie in with the ways in which we can be better as an industry. So it goes hand in hand.
Yeah. You mentioned the impact that the construction industry has overall on our footprint. And I know in construction, traditionally, change has been slow and there's risk aversion. Now, obviously, being in different roles, you've sort of built up some ideas on how to get things done and sort of expedite it. What sort of tips would you give to someone that would want to make a difference? Like any sort of things that you pass on in terms of what has been really effective for you to get people to buy in and to facilitate change.
Yeah. So it always starts with the person with the tool in their hand in our industry. Okay, so it's boots on the ground. So if you're going to approach how to improve our industry, always put those lenses on and think, if I'm the person with the tool in my hand, how can I get more tool time? How can I raise it from 50 to 60% up to 70 or 80%? So then when you really put those lenses on, you're thinking, well, what keeps those tradespeople from being more productive? And by the way, human nature is like everyone wants to be productive. Nobody wants to rework. Nobody wants to, wait on stuff. And when you really look at our industry, in spite of all of the technologies that we've developed over the past few decades, we haven't improved production at all, and it's not a good thing. So I look at it and think, well, I mean, if they're waiting on data, if they're waiting on materials, if they are having to go and assemble things from a lift or on the ground, that's going to be less efficient. So this is where I get into really understanding how to do advanced work packaging, how to do prefabrication, how to do offsite manufacturing, how to set a cadence up that becomes predictable and reliable so that when the tradespeople show up, they're not wondering what their task is that day. They know exactly what they have to do. They have all of their tools at their disposal. The materials are, organized in a way that it's easy and efficient for them to install. That's really, I mean, it's not that, sexy when it comes to like brand new technologies, but it literally is what makes the biggest difference in our industry from an improvement standpoint. Now we do have, great tools that can help us through technology to look at our designs, and try to, make the models better so that we can enhance and enable offsite manufacturing. That's a bit of a conundrum we're dealing with right now, or how do you pull way left and then start thinking about that from the very get-go instead of waiting until you're in the field and then saying, now where's our opportunity? So, that's really where the industry is right now.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Anything that I did not ask you, but you wanted to talk about or leave with us as a lesson?
Well, I mean, I do think it's important for the industry to start looking at this, what I call what the industry calls Scope 3 emissions
Hmm.
for greenhouse gas. So, I'm encouraging designers and developers and contractors to really go and seek out and request product declarations from their vendors, so that they can understand what kind of materials that they're getting and which ones are more sustainable than other ones. There's lots of resources online for this, and it's interesting because, like, this gets right in with the zero waste and the abilities to use things that have embodied carbon. And there's technologies right now that are wonderful that we should be taking part of, that aren't that hard to add into our designs. And I'll give you one quick example. So in our specifications over the years, concrete, one of the biggest offenders of greenhouse gas, has always been kind of a lazy way of structural engineers saying, I want a 6 stack mix, I want a 5 stack mix, I want to mix, whatever. And they don't really fine tune those mixes because, who has the time to do that? But as a developer who does, just gobs and gobs of concrete, I love concrete and I want to make it more sustainable. So we have really focused on having what we call the outcome-based specifications, or not the ones that are prescriptive, but they're more performance based on not just functionality, but also on sustainability. You can do that with almost any product, right? So I would recommend and encourage people to kind of study that and then make our business better through these really simple ways of looking at the lenses of performance based versus just picking what was always available.
Yeah, very, very good lesson. Well, Nancy, you have a wonderful story, and thank you for sharing your knowledge.
My pleasure. It's been great. Thanks so much.